I'm Maree Bowen, and I'm talking today about opportunities to build resilience of beef cattle properties in the Mulga Lands of southwest Queensland. I'd like to start by acknowledging my key colleague on this work, Fred Chudley. Fred brought the economist skills to the project. We both work for the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries Queensland. I'd also like to acknowledge the regional beef and sheep DAF teams, particularly the Charleville team that provided input to this analysis, and local producers who also provided valuable input. Our work was funded by the Drought and Climate Adaptation Program, which is a Queensland government-funded program. There are major challenges for beef businesses in the Mulga Lands. We know that the area has inherently low productivity and profitability, and there's widespread pasture and land degradation, which is very well documented. In addition, similar to other grazing areas across Northern Australia, beef producers have to contend with climate and market variability, declining terms of trade, and an ongoing disconnect between asset values and returns. So therefore, to remain in business and to build resilience, producers need to regularly produce a profit and build capital. And to do this, they must get the management strategies right and determine how to incorporate new technology to improve profit. A research objective in this study was to conduct a contemporary assessment of various management strategies and alternative investment options for a representative beef cattle property in the Mulga Lands of southwest Queensland. In doing that, we wanted to identify opportunities to improve profitability and business resilience for these Mulga Land producers. We used the Farm Management Economics Framework to conduct our analyses, and we used the Breed Cow and Dynama herd budgeting software package, which was developed by our departmental staff and is freely available from our government websites. Our analysis was a property-level whole farm analysis. Initially, we calculated expected returns and operating profit for steady-state herds, and then we conducted marginal analyses to assess alternatives, so alternative management options for their impact on profitability, cash flow and risk over a 30-year time period. So this marginal analysis determines the extra return on the extra capital invested to make the change. We used long-term expectations that take variability into account as much as possible. So that included long-term expectations of the biological performance of the base herd, so mortality, reproduction and growth paths, and also of commodity prices. We used historical last 10-year prices to derive expected values. We designed a representative property on which to conduct our analyses. The property for the Mulga Lands region was 20,000 hectares within 100 kilometres of Charleville. We had a mix of land types there, soft, hard mulga and black soil, which was interspersed with the mulga land types. On average, the property was phosphorus deficient for cattle, so 4 to 5 parts per million in the top 10 centimetres of soil. We had a Bos Indicus crossbred breeding herd. It was a self-replacing herd that we started with on the property. Initially, we assumed this property had a fairly low level of management input to reflect what many producers in the area currently adopt. So this property was running 600 adult equivalents with continuous mating, 2 main musters per year and first mating females at 2 years of age. There was no weaning, no herd vaccinations or supplements applied, and steers were sold off their mothers at 10 to 12 months of age and 220 kgs of live weight. We then tested a number of strategies to improve the profitability of the base herd. Initially, we tested strategies for the property when it was operated as a beef business. We looked at sequential implementation of basic herd management strategies initially. So firstly, we looked at reducing the stocking rate on that property to 500 AEs, which was considered the safe carrying capacity for that property, in combination with implementing weaning, pregnancy testing and basic herd vaccinations. Then, in combination with the first step, we looked at increasing steer sale age from unweaned yearlings to weaned 18-month-old steers, which was the optimal for that area. Then in combination with the first two steps, we implemented inorganic supplements of sulphur, phosphorus and nitrogen. Secondly, we looked at additional strategies for that beef business. So we looked at converting from a breeding to a steer turnover enterprise, control mating, buffel paddock development, whole cottonseed for the breeder herd, and 50% of years to improve breeding nutrition, and destocking in response to drought. So livestock sales or agistment, and then various options for recovery, either natural increase in numbers, purchasing pregnancy tested in-calf breeders, or agistment income. And finally, we looked at alternative investment options to beef. We looked at rangeland meat goat production or carbon farming through carbon sequestration. When we present the results from these marginal analyses of implementing strategies, we present the extra profit per year, which is a net present value. So this is the net returns over the life of the investment, which is 30 years, converted to an amortised annual value. We also present the peak deficit in cash flow caused by implementing the investment, the number of years to peak deficit, and the payback period, which is the number of years before the investment pays back, and the internal rate of return on the capital invested. So if we firstly look at strategies for achieving basic herd management for that beef property, and we're comparing those back to that initial base with low-level management, you can see here that the first two steps of implementing the safe carrying capacity, weaning, preg-testing and vaccinations made very little difference to the profitability of the property. Unmeasurable, so less than $5,000 difference in profitability every year over 30 years. However, when in combination with those first two steps, we increased age of steer turn-off from yearlings to 18 months, which was the optimal, we were able to increase property profitability more substantially. So adding over $12,000 profit every year per year over 30 years. We then used that base where we'd implemented those, property where we'd implemented those basic management strategies as a base for comparison to implementing inorganic supplements. And we looked at 3 different scenarios there, supplementing just in the dry period with sulphur, phosphorus and nitrogen, in the growing period only with sulphur and phosphorus, and then in the dry period and the growing period. And what you can see here is that supplementing in the growing period produced the most favourable response. So the 2 strategies that made a really big difference here were increasing the age of steer turn-off to the optimal and supplementing in the growing period with sulphur and phosphorus. So we then used or created a new base property which had implemented these initial basic management strategies up to this point here and growing period supplements as a new base for testing additional management strategies for that property. Out of all of those additional strategies that we assessed, and we were comparing those to that new base with basic herd management, we found that the effect of these strategies on annual property profit resulted in either no measurable difference, so less than plus or minus $5,000 per annum every year over 30 years, or resulted in a large negative effect. So, for example, feeding whole cottonseed at $350 per tonne, so a fairly reasonable price, resulted in a decrease in profit of more than $25,000 every year on average over 30 years. The exception was destocking in response to drought. But this strategy only measurably improved profitability when we could make savings in fuel, oil and maintenance associated with feeding mulga browse of at least 20% on average over time, in addition to a reduction in operators' allowance of 10%. So overall, we found very limited opportunity to improve the profitability and viability of the beef enterprise. When we look at total property returns, so a steady state analysis of this beef cattle enterprise, we can see that no matter what we did to this beef enterprise, it was an unviable property. So we started off with the self-replacing herd with low-level management. You can see there was a negative operating profit for that property and a negative rate of return on total capital. When we implemented basic management strategies but no inorganic supplements, we improved things a little bit, but we still had a negative operating profit and a negative rate of return on total capital. When we added in the sulphur and phosphorus supplements, again we had an improvement, but that business was still unviable. The steer turnover operation was also unviable. So this then led us to looking at alternative investments to beef for this Mulga property. And one of those was running the whole property as a rangeland meat goat enterprise. And for simplicity here in this steady state analysis, we're assuming all the infrastructure is already in place that we need to efficiently manage rangeland goats, including a wild dog exclusion fence. So if we assume that all of that's in place and we're running rangeland meat goats, you can see that this enterprise had a positive operating profit and a positive rate of return on total capital. So the next step was to look at what if we had to change from our existing beef cattle enterprise and invest in infrastructure to achieve that. And we looked at that in a marginal. When we changed or converted our beef enterprise to a rangeland meat goat enterprise, we needed to invest in wild dog exclusion fencing and sufficient internal infrastructure so that we could efficiently manage rangeland goats. When we did that, we found that we could add substantially to the property's profit. We could add over $48,000 per year over 30 years from making that change. But we had a substantial peak deficit in cash flow, and it took 14 years for the business to be back where it was financially as a result of implementing that change, although the long-term profitability could be substantially improved. When we looked at carbon farming through carbon sequestration, we looked at two situations here. Firstly, we started with our beef herd, and we looked at converting part of the property to carbon farming. So carbon farming on 50% of the property or 75% of that property. And on the remainder of the property, we ran a reduced beef enterprise. We accounted for the 100-year permanence periods within our 30-year analysis, and we accounted for the fact that we only received income for the first 25 years of that contract. So you can see here that the greater the area of the property we converted to carbon farming, the more we added to the profitability of that business from doing so. We were also interested in what would happen if we started with a rangeland meat goat herd and we converted part of the property to carbon farming. So we did the same thing again, but found that converting a goat enterprise or reducing a goat enterprise to implement carbon farming reduced the profitability of that property or that business. And that was because we were starting with a profitable business or profitable enterprise in the first instance. In conclusion, we found very limited opportunity to improve profitability or resilience of the Mulga Lands beef enterprise, but full or partial conversion to rangeland goats or carbon farming respectively improved property returns and viability. Importantly though, the farm management economics framework should be used to assess strategies for individual businesses with consideration of current management, resources, skills and goals. Producers can contact their local DAF extension officers to arrange a one-on-one economic analyses, utilising the expertise of our DAF economists. All of our project products are available from our project page on Future Beef. Search for Future Beef Profitability and Resilience. We have reports for a number of regions across Northern Australia, including the Mulga Lands report, and they can all be accessed and downloaded from our project page. We also have tactical spreadsheets available for assessing drought response and recovery decisions, so destocking and then restocking decisions. We've got 13 simple spreadsheets there with examples in them and recorded presentations to explain how to use those, and they're also accessed from our project webpage. Thank you.